The Trump cabinet pick, who may be the toughest pill to swallow for Senate Republicans, heads to Capitol Hill this week. Donald Trump's pick to head the Department of Health and Human Services, noted anti-vax activist Robert F. Kennedy Jr. has been, at one point or another, at odds with Republicans on everything from abortion to the environment, at odds with Donald Trump specifically on his conduct and basic fitness for office, and of course, at odds with science itself on multiple public health fronts. Here is what RFK has said about Donald Trump over the years, including as recently as 6 months ago.
In many ways, he's discredited the American experiment with self-governance, and he's a bully. And, I don't like bullies.
I think Donald Trump was a terrible president.
He's not like Hitler. Hitler had like a plan. Hitler was interested in policy. He had an historical view.
Let Donald Trump mull that. There's also RFK's own checkered past, allegations of sexual misconduct against him among them. The Wall Street Journal reported last month that he, quote, has been accused of sexual assault in the late 1990s by a woman who was willing to testify before the Senate. In July, RFK apologized to her, claiming he did not remember what happened. His accuser telling the Washington Post that RFK's apology was, quote, disingenuous and arrogant. All of this, the allegations of sexual misconduct, his stance on abortion, his one-time opposition to Trump, are important questions for the senators to ask. But the biggest flashpoint for RFK's confirmation prospects remains concerns over what RFK will do with one of the cornerstones of public health, and that is vaccine programs. Here's what Donald Trump had to say today about his HHS nominee and about reporting that one of RFK's allies is petitioning to end approval of the polio vaccine.
Nothing's going to happen very quickly. I think you're going to find that Bobby he's a very rational guy. I found him to be very rational. No, nothing, you're not going to lose the polio vaccine. That's not going to happen. I saw what happened with the polio. I have friends that were very much affected by that. I have friends from many years ago, and they have, obviously, they're still in not such good shape because of it. And many people died. And the moment they took that vaccine, it ended. Dr. Jonas Salk did a great job, so I don't anticipate that at all. But we're going to look into finding why is the autism rate so much higher than it was 20, 25, 30 years ago. I mean, it's 100 times higher. There's something wrong, and we're going to try finding that.
We will repeat every time. There is no evidence tying vaccines to autism. Joining our conversation, Politico national correspondent, MSNBC contributor Betsy Woodruff-Swan is here, plus MSNBC columnist, author of the newsletter To the Contrary, Charlie Sykes is here, and Basil's still with us. Betsy, we were on the air Friday when the polio story had broken earlier in the day, and by the time we got off the air, Mitch McConnell had responded and criticized and condemned RFK Jr.'s position on the polio vaccine. Your sense, sort of analytically and in terms of your reporting, on how aware Senate Republicans are of the specifics of how aggressively RFK has pushed against approvals and requirements for vaccines like the polio vaccine?
They know about it. The senators are very much aware, and the fact that McConnell put out that statement just a couple days ago only would have heightened the extent to which RFK's anti-vax history and long and detailed record is very much front of mind for members of the Senate Republican Conference. I spoke earlier today to a Senate Republican aide who said that one of the biggest problems RFK is going to face, in addition, of course, to the anti-vaccine conspiracy mongering, comes in two separate buckets. One, of course, is concerns that anti-abortion senators have about RFK's very consistent and vociferous support for abortion rights. What this Senate aide told me is that for many of these Republican senators, especially the very conservative ones, opposition to abortion is the top issue. For some of them, it's the reason they decided to enter public office in the first place. And they feel intense discomfort with voting for somebody to head a part of the government that's responsible for these health issues, who's been so outspoken in favor of abortion rights. Now, That does not mean RFK is dead on arrival in the Senate. Far from it. The safe bet is always that Senate Republicans will give Trump what he wants. But what it does mean, at a minimum, is that some of these meetings RFK is having this week are going to be tense and uncomfortable. And the other thing, though, about RFK that jumped out to me as really important and another big challenge for him is going to be from Republicans in the agriculture-heavy states. RFK has leveled lots of criticism at Big Food, lots of criticism at pesticides and other tools that agribusinesses use to try to increase crop yields. He's been very critical of genetically modified foods being grown. And for farmers in these ag states, yeah, they worry about Trump being mad at them, but they really, really, really worry about the Farm Bureau being mad at them. It's core to the economies of many of these states. So for some of these senators going back home, making the case against RFK would be slightly easier if they decide to vote no, because they'll be able to point to economic agribusiness interests in their home state. Again, I have to emphasize the safe money is always on Senate Republicans doing what Trump wants, but RFK definitely is in a more complex and challenging situation than many of Trump's other cabinet nominees.
You know, Charlie Sykes, what's interesting is when the Senate Republicans' politics clash with Trump's politics. I mean, Trump's politics on RFK are abundantly clear. I mean, he's sort of a mythological folk hero in the wellness space online. The Joe Rogan audience likes RFK. Trump sees that as an important piece of his political coalition. Right. To Betsy's point, it's completely at odds with the part of Trump's coalition that he is, for all of his extreme policies and actions, oddly indifferent about, and that's the abortion space. Apparently, RFK just said, quote, "I support it," end quote. I think that was about the polio vaccine, but his own lawyer is actively trying to revoke approvals for it. So what do you make of this spaghetti at the wall, say and do anything approach to get RFK Jr. confirmed to be part of Trump's cabinet?
Well, Betsy absolutely nailed it when she said, you know, that this is a very complex and challenging nomination because the agriculture issue is a very, very big deal. The question of vaccines, where they're going on that. Obviously, allegations of sexual assault are not in any way disqualifying to be part of the Trump administration. But I do think that the hearings are going to be extraordinarily interesting, and I'm very curious to know how aggressive the public health lobby is and public health community is going to be in talking about the threats that many of RFK's ideas would have, and what it would mean for children's health, what it would mean for our ability to handle the next pandemic, because many of his ideas may be popular on certain podcasts, but they are way, way, way outside of the mainstream. And most Americans have no idea of some of the things that he has said and some of the things that he has done and the consequences of his ideas.
So, Michael, that is an interesting quote from the president-elect. I think he's going to be much less radical than people think. Should people who are concerned about access to vaccines, who are concerned about sending their kids to school, if maybe a lot of other kids aren't vaccinated, should they take him at his word?
No, they should not. They should not. And the plan, as has already been articulated, is to downplay the controversial positions of a man who's been on the record on these positions since the 1990s, as Vaughn has aptly pointed out. You think that's going to change? You have 30 plus years of this belief system, this core belief system, that you're suddenly going to walk away from that in year one of a Trump administration, when Trump has all more than embraced it by saying, oh, you can go wild in healthcare. The only thing Donald Trump doesn't want him to do is to step on anything that hurts, you know, his particular transaction on oil and gas. That's his concern. So, you know, the plan is the lie. You know, the plan is to go and sit in front of these senators and lie to them. And that's essentially what, oh, no, we're not going to do that. Oh, no, it's not going to be that bad. Just as those same senators were lied to about the positions that Supreme Court justices from the Trump administration nomination process would take on abortion. Oh, no, stare decisis, you know, Roe versus Wade is settled law. Well, here we are. So y'all need to understand exactly what the plan is. The plan is to lie to get past the post on this issue, to get the man confirmed. And then, as Donald Trump said, he can do whatever he wants as long as it doesn't impact what Donald Trump wants to see out of the oil and gas industry. That's it.
So Cheryl, RFK Jr. laid out to Vaughn exactly what he says Donald Trump expects of him. So let me play that as a reminder.
He's been very specific in what he said. He wants me to do three things. One, clean up the corruption of the agencies, particularly the conflicts of interest that have turned those agencies into captive agencies for the pharmaceutical industry and the food industry, the other industries that they're supposed to be regulating. Number two, to return those agencies to the gold standard science, the empirically based, evidence-based medicine that they were famous for when I was a kid. And number three, to make America healthy again, to end the chronic disease epidemic. And President Trump has told me that he wants to see measurable, concrete results within 2 years.
I mean, Cheryl, to most Americans, they hear that. It sounds good, right? Clean up corruption in the agencies, use the gold standard of science, make America healthy again. But is the devil in the details?
Yes. Absolutely. The devil is in the details. So let's pick those things apart. First of all, make America healthy again. That actually does sound good. And scientists across the board and public health people are worried about what Kennedy calls the chronic disease epidemic. So he can find agreement there. When he talks about rooting out corruption and regulatory capture, one thing he's not saying is that in our system, for better or for worse, the drug industry partners with government to bring vaccines, to bring drugs to market. The people who advise the CDC and the FDA often have relationships. These outside scientists have relationships with the pharmaceutical manufacturers. They are required to disclose those relationships. If you took all those folks off the vaccine advisory committees that recommend approval and guide recommendations on how to use vaccines, you wouldn't have the nation's experts in on that process because they all work with the industry. So that's number one. When he talks about returning the agencies to the gold standard of science, I think what he is referring to here is this idea that all vaccines should be tested in placebo-controlled clinical trials. In other words, half the people in the study get the vaccine, half get nothing, a saline solution. That is how vaccines have traditionally been tested when there were no vaccines. But once you have a vaccine for a disease, say like polio, and you're going to make a new vaccine, you would never withhold that existing vaccine from an infant. That would be unethical. So when you hear a lot of talk about, placebo-controlled clinical trials, yeah, that sounds great, but are you going to keep your baby from getting the polio vaccine so that baby can be an experiment to see if a new vaccine is better than the old one? Probably not.
Yeah, I mean, Cheryl, it's interesting because Senator Mitch McConnell, and we've reported this before, he still suffers the effect of when he was a kid. He had polio. I mean, he has very strong and very specific feelings about this. And I want to quote him from a statement. Efforts to undermine public confidence in proven cures are not just uninformed, they're dangerous. Anyone seeking the Senate's consent to serve in the incoming administration would do well to steer clear of even the appearance of association with such efforts. Where does this stuff come from in your reporting?
Where it comes from is a lawyer who has represented Mr. Kennedy. His name is Aaron Siri. He's a New York lawyer, and he has represented vaccine-injured plaintiffs. He's also representing a group called the Informed Consent Action Network. That group is run by Del Bigtree, who was Kennedy's communications director on the campaign. Siri, the lawyer, has petitioned the FDA for withdrawal of the polio vaccine on the grounds that it wasn't subjected to a placebo-controlled clinical trial. And as you saw, Mitch McConnell is up in arms about this. And I think Mitch McConnell is really the senator to watch here. You also saw, interestingly, the president himself, or the president-elect himself, say, we're not going to we're not going to touch the polio vaccine. So I think that's kind of a third rail for Kennedy. I will say that while Kennedy is not the petitioner in this case, he's not the person bringing the petition to the FDA to withdraw the vaccine. He has espoused the same ideas that are in the petition. In other words, he wants the vaccine to be tested against placebo. So that's where all that concern is coming from. I think Kennedy will probably downplay it, as your other folks have said. And we'll see if senators like Mitch McConnell believe him.
So let's dive right in as some of President-elect Donald Trump's controversial cabinet picks work to win over members of Congress. Republican Senator Thom Tillis is warning that the pressure campaign to push through nominees could backfire. Speaking on Fox News yesterday, Senator Tillis criticized those who are threatening to fund primary challenges against Republican senators who've been critical of Trump's picks.
What's amazing to me is how we're not even in the new administration. And we haven't even seen the background checks, which I know the administration is sending our way. So there's a lot of information that needs to be gathered. And these folks who are making primary challenges, running ads, they seem more like political opportunists than thoughtful members of the Republican Party. A lot of this are third parties that are making money from the fundraising campaigns to put some ads in there, but double-digit percentages are going into their pockets. Here's what I would tell them. If they really support President Trump's nominees, they should stand down and let the nominees win on their own merits, and I think most of them will. Members are not really swayed by these. If anything, they could create a structural problem for future nominees if they overreach. Kash Patel, who I'm working with because he's on my committee of jurisdiction, is going to enjoy solid Republican support on the Senate floor and coming out of the committee. I think that Pete Hegseth is going to have to go to the committee and answer some questions about organizational experience, some of his past marriages, those sorts of things. All of that's fair game when you're running for a cabinet or sub-cabinet position.
And Senator Susan Collins, who has expressed concern with some of Trump's picks, was asked about the pressure campaign last week.
What do you think of the pressure campaign from the Trump allies to try to get you to toe the line on these nominees? Is it effective?
No. I've taken many, many difficult oaths over the years that I've been privileged to serve in the Senate.
Jim Vandehei, actually, Thom Tillis is so right. So many people, what you see, whether it's here or whether you see it on social media, so many people are just out there. It's the grift. They want to say, hey, we're fighting for your side, contribute here. And it's unfortunately, that's just part of the grift that's out there. But in this case, especially when you're dealing with the Senate, and Donald Trump's not even president yet, and there are all these threats that are flying around there, and we're going to get them, and we're going to shove it down their throat, and we're going to this, and we're going to that. I mean, you're talking about 4 senators, and you've probably lost Lisa Murkowski and Mitch McConnell on most of them, Susan Collins perhaps on some. What do you think about Thom Tillis's remarks that this could backfire?
I think both things are true, right? I think senators are really annoyed by it. There's a ton of pressure. This is unprecedented in a transition to power, to have people running ads, to be people already threatening to have a primary challenger, to, putting money into PACs to do just that. So it is annoying to the senators. But at the same time, it's effective. Look what happened with Joni Ernst in Iowa. She was so opposed to the defense secretary nominee. She was telling her colleagues about it. She was making not even very cryptic statements publicly about her opposition. And then she gets pummeled on X, gets pummeled in conservative media. A lot of money is spent back home. And suddenly she has to say, wait a second, maybe this could actually work after all. And so I think that pressure campaign is not going to abate. And I think a lot of senators, especially those who want to stick around for a long time, they are persuadable when that pressure comes. They do fear a well-funded primary challenge. They do want to endear themselves with the president-elect. And so I think that dynamic is going to be only intensified because there's several nominees that you've talked about a ton on the show that are very controversial, that senators, when you talk to them privately, have deep, deep, deep reservations about, yet they might hold those deep reservations, plug their nose and say, whatever, I want to go with the president because I don't want the consequences.
Yeah, I just heard something, though, from Tom Tillis there. Pretty shocking. So most Republicans are going to be okay with Kash Patel.
Yeah.
A guy who has promised to throw journalists in jail. Let's just full stop here again. And there was a New York Times article saying, well, because the Republicans have some problems with the FBI, then yes, Kash Patel is maybe the guy that they'll be supporting. There are 1,000 people you could put in to actually clean up the FBI, to overhaul the parts of the FBI that need to be overhauled, that doesn't have an enemies list, Tom Tillis, that doesn't have an enemies list of like 60, 62 people, and hasn't promised to go after them in power, and hasn't said, yes, we're going to go out and we're going to throw members of the press in jail. And yet Tom Tillis is like, yeah, well, Republican. That is shocking. They're still looking at Hegseth, and they should. And I've heard, like you, still some problems for him. Tulsi Gabbard had a terrible week last week, but Kash Patel is like, oh yeah, you know what? Yeah, the FBI's done some things that are wrong. So you're going to put somebody in again, has an enemies list of over 60 people that he said he's going after, and said he's going to arrest members of the media that didn't follow along with Donald Trump's 2020 Stop the Steal conspiracy campaign. Are the Republicans really going to allow the next FBI director to be a person who has said that, who has done that?
To this point, Patel has really benefited from the spotlight being elsewhere. Gates, Hegseth, Tulsi Gabbard, and how that Republicans, even if they haven't had to take a vote yet, but even just signaling their opposition to some, they feel like, well, I can only even do that for so many of these candidates. And Patel has flown under the radar. And that's going to continue likely this week because Robert F. Kennedy Jr. goes to the Hill today, and he's going to, rightly, take a lot of the spotlight there. So Patel has more quietly gone through this process. He's met with a lot of Republicans. But you're so right. There are Republicans, and there are, sure, Democrats, too, who feel like there might be some changes needed at the FBI. Yeah. But Kash Patel is not an agent of reform. He's an agent of retribution. He's in that job explicitly because he channels what Donald Trump wants. It's long been said that Patel, no ideology of his own. It's simply whatever Donald Trump wants him to do. And he has an enemies list of his own that's in his book. He wrote it out, as well as someone who is going to take his cues from who Trump has said for months now he wants to have retribution against, whether that's his own members of his first administration, lawmakers, members of the January 6th committee, members of the media. And Patel has shown no hesitation in signaling his support for that. And at least to this moment, Republicans on the Hill seem okay with it.
He's promised to do it.
He's promised to do it.
He's promised. It's not that he's signaled. He's promised to do it. And I can say, Richard, not only what does this say to other countries across the globe, what does this say to the markets about the rule of law? There's a reason why our stock market is the envy of the world. Our economy is the envy of the world. There's a reason why people are leaving the London Stock Exchange and coming to the United States. There's a reason why businesses from all over the world are coming to the United States. It's the rule of law. You don't have to worry about things moving and changing and the rules and the laws changing depending on who's in office. Somebody like Kash Patel, who said, I have an enemies list of 62 people, and I promise you I'm going to arrest journalists, and I'm going to get them criminally or civilly, whatever it takes. That's Orban. That's exactly what Orban and Putin has said they're going to do. Let's look at their economies. I wonder how that would work for the United States of America once that happened the first time.
Two thoughts. Rule of law is the proverbial oxygen of a society and an economy. And you don't notice it's missing until it's missing, by which point it's a little bit late. So it is. It's central. It's foundational to all that we are. Second of all, one would have thought if you were the FBI director, you've got enough real challenges on your hand. We still have terrorism to worry about. Indeed, we could have more terrorism to worry about, given what's going on, say, in Syria, potentially. Right. Last I checked, we have serious crime problems in this country. Last I checked, we go down and down and down. Got corruption issues. So I would think the FBI director has his hands full without going after journalists.
When you want somebody in the FBI that actually knew how to run the FBI and actually had experience on how to do all of these things?
Well, I think that's one of the common threads here with this, with Hegseth and others. Put aside character issues and the rest. It's just a question of whether they have the necessary background. These are enormous management.
And by the way, there's no member of the Senate that thinks Pete Hegseth has what it takes to run the biggest, most powerful, most complicated, most Byzantine bureaucracy on planet Earth. Nobody, no Republican in the Senate believes that. So how does he get 50 votes?
That, to me, is what these hearings need to be more about. Quite honestly, I understand, the personal character issues and the rest. What I actually think these hearings ought to be about is whether this person has the qualifications, the backgrounds, the experience, yes, the judgment, I get it, to do these big, important, powerful jobs.
And so if you're thinking like this incoming president, who is often self-interested, and to him, a strong economy is the definition of strength to him. And I think the point that you've just made is one of the more important ones, is how does this ultimately impact the success of Donald Trump and the strength of Donald Trump? If destabilization of the rule of law, whether it's through the Department of Defense or the FBI, hurts the economy, ultimately, that's not good for the incoming president.
Well, it's terrible for the economy. It's terrible for the stock market.
It's terrible for America.
For America. It's terrible for democracy. It's something that we tried to say throughout the campaign on this show. We said, okay, yes, this is a challenge to American democracy. It's also a challenge to American capitalism if you destabilize constitutional norms and you destabilize the rule of law.
And joining me now is Democrat who serves on that committee and is chair for the subcommittee on primary health and retirement security, Massachusetts Senator Ed Markey. Senator, hard to know where to start, but let's talk with Donald Trump on autism, on vaccines. Here's part of what he had to say.
Something bad's happening. Again, you take a look at autism today versus 20, 25 years ago, it's like not even believable. So we're going to have reports. No, nothing's going to happen very quickly. I think you're going to find that Bobby is a very rational guy. I found him to be very rational. No, nothing, you're not going to lose the polio vaccine. That's not going to happen. But we're going to look into finding why is the autism rate so much higher than it was 20, 25, 30 years ago. I mean, it's 100 times higher. There's something wrong, and we're going to try finding that.
Senator Markey, I mean, part of the reason why there's more autism being diagnosed, there may be other factors, but there's also more diagnoses. There's more medical information. But give us your thoughts.
There is no scientific evidence linking autism to vaccines. None. And so when this misinformation continues to be spread, it is a disservice because it puts a cloud over families' decisions to have their children vaccinated against deadly diseases. It is absolutely irresponsible. In the same way that Robert Kennedy said that COVID-19 was the most dangerous vaccine ever issued. When he raises questions about the polio vaccine, when he raises questions about the measles vaccine, when he raises questions about all of these public health initiatives, which have transformed our country and the rest of the world. In 1900, the average age of death was 48 years of age, and we've added 30 years over the last century. And it's largely because of public health interventions like vaccines and other public health strategies, which have transformed not only our country, but the whole world. And what Robert F. Kennedy and what Donald Trump is doing is casting a shadow over all of that progress without any evidence to back it up whatsoever.
And people of a certain age who, lived during the FDR and World War II years before the Salk vaccine, like Senator McConnell, know very well the tragedy of polio and the fear of polio. I know it in my own family. Prominent journalists like Ben Bradley, The Washington Post. There were many people of that era who had childhood polio, and it was devastating. Children were taken from their parents and quarantined, in some cases for years.
It is outrageous that questions are being raised about the polio vaccine. It is safe. People should have confidence in it. We don't want hundreds of thousands of people a year infected with the polio germs, with what can cause them great harm. And again, we don't want people around the world to think that the United States is questioning the safety of polio vaccinations, because it would make it, unfortunately, inexorably inevitable that we would see a recurrence of polio somewhere in the world. We have to be the global health leaders on public health initiatives. Mitch McConnell is a good example of someone who suffered from it. But again, our goal should be that children have to look to the history books to find that there ever was such a scourge as polio, or the measles, or any of these other diseases which are now openly being questioned in terms of the vaccines which help to prevent them.
And it was always taken as an article of faith that before your child goes to public kindergarten, or I'm sure in private schools as well, that they would be the rubella and the other childhood vaccinations. It was never controversial until this whole autism issue was raised. But what do you think is going to be the hearing for RFK Jr.? Will Democrats get Republican support? Will Mitch McConnell be a key factor here?
It's very clear that Robert Kennedy is unqualified, unserious, and dangerous in terms of his views on public health in our country. My hope is that Republican senators will come away with that same conclusion as they look at his record, as they look at who he most closely associates with, including his own lawyer, who is asking for a withdrawal of the polio vaccine from the marketplace. These are very dangerous things that go right to the health of every family in our country. And I hope that the Republican senators question closely, because there is no Democrat or Republican vaccination. It affects everyone. And if, in fact, any of these vaccines are withdrawn from the marketplace, it would be very dangerous. In fact, what Robert Kennedy said was that he was going to lay off 600 people at NIH and give infectious diseases an 8-year break. That's his own quote. That's just dangerous, and it is irresponsible, it's outrageous, and he is not qualified to be the Secretary of Health and Human Services. And my hope is that enough Republican senators will see with clarity the danger that he poses, so that he will be rejected for this very important post.